Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a time when your job included shaving beards, slicing boils, yanking teeth, and, if things got really fancy, hacking off limbs in someone's barn. You're about to step into the grimy shoes of a medieval barber surgeon, one of the least glamorous, most misunderstood jobs in all of history. You're not in a polished apothecary with glass vials and scented herbs. No, you're in a half-rotten wooden shack where blood dries black on the floorboards and the smell of week-old ale mingles with whatever died behind the walls. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake just before dawn. A rat scurries across your feet, possibly the same one you saw last night gnawing on your bread. You flick it away and stretch your aching back. You sleep on a rough wool blanket atop uneven boards. There's no mattress, no pillow, just you and the smell of your own boiled linens. Today's appointments: 2 abscess lancing, 1 minor surgery, a mole removal, and, if your apprentice doesn't faint again, 3 routine haircuts. You trudge to the hearth and light the morning fire with flint, the sparks barely catching on the damp wood. Smoke curls around your face, it stings your eyes, but you're used to that. It'll take an hour to heat your iron tools in the coals. Yes, heat. You sterilize by roasting. Outside, the town is already buzzing. Chickens cluck in the street, a cart creaks by loaded with what looks like questionable meat, and a town crier yells something about a missing goat and a new tax on salt. You don't care. Your concern is the red and white striped pole you've just propped outside, your calling card. Blood and bandages. The barber's trade. Your first patient limps in clutching his side. He grunts something about pain near the ribs, which could be anything from a bruised liver to a lodged arrowhead from a bar brawl. You poke around with your fingers and ask if it hurts here. Or here. Or here. He screams. You nod wisely. There's no anesthesia, of course. That's what strong ale and leather straps are for. You pour him a generous slug from your clay jug and hand him the strap to bite down on. You prepare your blade, a sharpened piece of iron you wipe down with urine and a rag, and go to work. The lump is large and warm. You slice. Pus erupts like a geyser. It smells like spoiled broth and burnt onions. Your apprentice gags in the corner. You press cloth to the wound, sprinkle on a mixture of cobwebs and dried moss, you heard it helps, and tell him to rest. He pays you with 2 copper coins and a boiled egg. Not bad. By midday, your shirt is streaked with blood, someone else's spit, and a little bit of your own vomit. You rinse your hands in a bowl of brownish water. Soap is for the rich, or the clergy, and even they mostly just smell better while dying. Your next client is a merchant who wants his beard shaped before meeting a potential bride. You sharpen your shears and get to trimming. This is the easy part. Until he mentions an infected tooth. Ah yes. Teeth. The holy grail of pain. You ask him to sit back and open wide. His breath could kill a small horse. You spot the angry red gum and the blackened molar. With a pair of tongs that once held coals last week, you grip the tooth and pull. He shrieks. Your apprentice faints. The tooth comes free with a sound like stepping on a snail. You rinse your tool again. The same bowl. You think about changing the water, but there's still half a day to go. As the sun climbs, the heat inside your shop intensifies. You sweat through your tunic, which has patches of dried blood from yesterday, and possibly the day before that. Flies buzz around the leeches in the jar by the window. They're tomorrow's job. Your stomach growls. Lunch is a crust of bread and a pickled onion. The bread is tough as wood, but the onion clears your sinuses at least. You glance at your log, scratched in charcoal on a board nailed to the wall. You've got a noble servant coming in later. Rumor has it he fell on a spiked rake while stealing turnips. You shake your head. This will be fun. As you wait, you tidy your instruments: scalpel, saw, tweezers, thread, hooks, scissors, needles. All iron. All heavy. All stained. You debate sharpening the bone saw but decide the edge is fine enough. You'll regret that later. The servant arrives, pale and limping. His thigh is wrapped in soiled cloth, soaked through with blood. You unwrap it slowly. The wound is jagged, deep, and already starting to stink. Gangrene? Possibly. Historians still argue whether medieval barbers knew how to spot infection, or just guessed when a limb looked too green to keep. You clean the wound with vinegar. He howls. You stitch him up, say a quick prayer to Saint Sebastian, and hope for the best. The man gives you a silver coin. You stare at it, stunned. It's the most you've made all month. You end your day by sweeping the floor with a birch broom and tossing the blood-soaked rags into a bucket out back. You don't wash them, you hang them up and let the rain do the job. Tomorrow, you'll reuse the same linens. It's wasteful to throw them away. You sit by the hearth, nursing a cup of thin ale and watching the flames flicker. Your hands ache. Your back screams. But for now, you're alive. And that, in this job, is a miracle in itself. The fires died down, but the stench of the day lingers. You rub your aching hands and glance toward the corner where your instruments are laid out on a rough wooden shelf. The tools gleam faintly in the candlelight, if gleam can be applied to metal that's half rusted and usually sticky with something unpleasant. Today was only the beginning. Tomorrow, the real fun starts. Because today you were just cutting and stitching. Tomorrow, you're pulling teeth and poking at tumors. You sleep badly, with dreams of screaming patients and snapping bones. When the rooster crows, you wake with straw stuck to your cheek and the creeping realization that you'll have to pull another tooth before breakfast. Your first patient arrives before the sun is properly up. He's holding a cloth to his jaw and mumbling curses at the devil, or maybe his wife. He's in pain, and you know before he even sits down that it's going to be a back molar. The worst kind. You nod sagely, gesture for him to sit, and squint into his mouth with a small oil lamp held near his lips. It's red, swollen, and smells like death. You sigh. You don't have real dental tools, not that they'd help much. You select your favorite, a pair of curved iron tongs slightly bent out of shape from last week's mishap with a mule. You brace your knee against his chest and yank. Something crunches. Not the tooth, just his jaw. The second pull brings it free, along with a splatter of blood that hits your tunic in a new place. Progress. He pays in salted fish and limps away with half a smile and a full dose of trauma. You clean the tool, again, clean being optimistic. You dip it in a bowl of sour ale, give it a swipe with your apron, and it's ready for the next victim. Your second appointment is a woman with a growing lump on her back. You know what this means, probably a sebaceous cyst. Possibly something worse. In any case, it's coming off. She lies down on the bench, gripping it like it might run away. You slice the skin with your scalpel, really just a thin, flat knife from the butcher's stall next door, and pus begins to ooze. You press both thumbs around it like you're milking a goat. It bursts with a pop and sprays the floorboards. Your apprentice retches again. He'll learn. Historians still argue whether barbers of your time understood cysts as blocked follicles or considered them signs of demonic imbalance. You, personally, suspect it's something to do with bad luck and cheese. You sew the wound shut with a curved bone needle and flaxen thread. It's rough, but she'll live. Probably. The next job's a tricky one, a tumor. The patient, a stoic man with sun-leathered skin, has a swollen knot on his thigh the size of an apple. It's hard. He says it's been growing for months. You press on it gently, then less gently, then try jabbing it with a long pin. It doesn't move or leak. You confer with your apprentice in whispers, just to sound professional. Then you declare, it must come out. The man doesn't flinch. He just nods, closes his eyes, and bites down on a strip of leather. You make the incision, working slowly with your knife while your apprentice pours boiling wine over the exposed tissue. The stench is indescribable, part beef stew, part week-old socks. The tumor resists, slick and stubborn. Eventually, it slides out like a peeled plum, gray and purple and wrong in every way. You hold it up for a moment. It glistens. You wish someone would applaud. Instead, the patient has passed out. You sew the wound shut with shaking hands and hope no one else comes in today. As you sit on your stool, you remember that in some towns, people pay to watch surgeries. A sort of medieval theater of pain. They cheer, place bets, and sometimes faint themselves. Your shop doesn't host that kind of show. You don't have enough benches. Or snacks. But you do have stories. Like the time you pulled 6 teeth from a knight who thought they were cursed. Or when a bishop came in with a demon in his ear, and you pulled out a beetle. Yes, that happened. Historians still debate whether insects living in body cavities were common, or just particularly unfortunate events that medieval folks took as omens. You're still holding the tumor when your apprentice clears his throat. He's pale but standing, which is an improvement. "Shall I burn it?" he asks. You nod. He tosses the tumor into the fire, where it hisses and pops. You both stare at it for a moment like it might explode. Then comes the final task of the day, washing your hands. You dip them in a wooden basin by the door, water-tinged brown and vaguely mossy. You rub them together, mostly out of habit. They still feel sticky. You eat dinner, half a turnip and a heel of bread. You chew slowly, watching the leeches on the shelf pulse gently in their jar. They'll get used tomorrow. Probably more than once. You lie down as the fire flickers. Your back throbs. You press a hand to your own side, wondering if that twinge is a pulled muscle, or the beginning of something your apprentice will have to slice out. For now, you sleep. And tomorrow, the cycle begins again. Teeth, tumors, and terrible tools, just another normal day for a medieval barber. You wake to the sound of sloshing. Your apprentice has dropped the leech jar, again. The little creatures are wriggling across the floor like damp licorice with legs, if licorice was alive and in a foul mood. You sigh. It's not even dawn. Leeches are your bread and butter. Not the tasty kind, those don't exist in your world. These are the squirming, squishy little vampires you place lovingly on wounds, boils, necks, and even inside noses. Yes, inside. The practice of bloodletting is an ancient art, beloved by physicians and feared by patients. You, a humble barber surgeon, are expected to know precisely how many ounces of blood to draw to cure melancholy, bad dreams, or just a general sense of unease. The answer is, nobody really knows. You just guess and hope. Your apprentice tries to scoop the leeches back into the jar with his bare hands. He yelps when one latches onto his finger. You shake your head. Rule 1, never show fear. Leeches can smell it. Probably. Your first client arrives still half asleep. He claims to be suffering from a heaviness of the spirit, which, in your professional opinion, translates to his wife yelled at him and his knees hurt. You offer him a wooden stool and select a particularly fat leech from the now secured jar. You dab a bit of goose grease on his neck and gently press the leech into place. It doesn't bite right away. It's picky. You hum softly, like a lullaby for bloodsuckers. Eventually, the leech finds its mark and begins to swell. Your client grimaces. You'll feel lighter soon, you lie. And you might not be wrong. After all, in this century, people still believe that draining blood releases excess humors, those delightful bodily fluids that are allegedly responsible for everything from toothaches to flatulence to heartbreak. Historians still argue whether anyone actually got better from bloodletting, or if they just became too dizzy to complain. While the leech fattens, you prepare a second one for the man's ankle. He winces as you apply it, but says nothing. You admire that. Some clients scream, flail, or faint, especially when you have to remove a leech that refuses to let go. You've seen one clamp onto an earlobe and refuse to budge until you offered it a drop of wine. You keep vinegar handy for that. It's your anti-leech spray. Doesn't smell great, but then again, nothing does. As the man sits quietly bleeding into your basin, you take a moment to clean up yesterday's mess. Blood-spattered cloths, crusted tools, and a suspiciously gooey lump you meant to throw out, probably part of a tooth or someone's lunch. You shove it into the fire. It hisses. The man rises unsteadily after you remove the leeches and bind his neck with a bit of linen. He pays you in dried figs. You hate figs, but you're not in a position to be picky. Your next client is a woman with swollen joints and a superstitious streak. She believes her pain is caused by evil humors trapped in her spine. You nod sympathetically and fetch the leeches. She requests 4, evenly spaced. 1 on each shoulder, 1 at the base of the spine, and 1 on her forehead, to clear the eyes. You oblige, though the forehead leech always makes you nervous. It's not unheard of for them to migrate into nostrils. You don't tell her that. She lies back and hums a hymn while they feed. There's something peaceful about watching a leech at work. It attaches, it drinks, it gets round and sleepy, and then it lets go with a tiny belch. It's like a strange little wine connoisseur, but for blood. You think, not for the first time, that they do their job better than most of your tools. Later, a monk visits with a parchment in hand. He wants you to perform a bloodletting in accordance with the phases of the moon. Apparently, Jupiter is in retrograde and the bile in his gut is rising. You stare blankly for a moment, then nod. You've heard weirder. You prepare a shallow cut on his arm with your lancet, a triangular piece of metal with a wooden grip. It's not sharp enough, so it takes 2 slices before the blood flows. He doesn't flinch. Monks are surprisingly tough. As you let the blood drain, you ask about the local rumors. A new plague in the next village, perhaps. Or a baker who found a coin in his dough and swears it's from a drowned queen. Nothing useful. Still, it's part of your daily ritual, cutting, bleeding, and gathering gossip. You bandage him with linen soaked in rosewater, your one nod to luxury, and he departs with a nod and a blessing. You don't believe it will protect you from infection, but it's nice to hear. Your apprentice, meanwhile, is fidgeting with a leech that has grown especially large. It has begun exploring the rim of its jar like a tiny, bloated snake. "I think it's trying to escape," he whispers. "Good," you reply. "It deserves freedom more than we do." By evening, you've drained 6 people, bled 2 roosters, for reasons you don't want to ask, and reapplied a leech to someone's tongue ulcer. You didn't even know tongues could get ulcers. You considered leeching yourself just to cope with the stress. You eat dinner alone, a lump of cheese, some brown bread, and a cup of broth that's more onion water than soup. You chew slowly, watching the candle burn low, the shadows flicker against the walls. The leech jar bubbles softly beside you. You wonder, not for the first time, whether your job is helping anyone at all, or if you're just slowly draining people until they give up. Still, tomorrow they'll be back. With bad blood, blocked humors, and enough medieval misery to keep you in business until the Black Death rolls in again. The rooster crows again. You've started to hate that bird. You blink awake, sore in places you didn't know existed, and with a vague memory of dropping off mid-thought somewhere between your third fig and a leech attempting a prison break. You groan and roll onto your side. Today's calendar, scratched onto a plank with a rusty nail, reads, 3 haircuts. 1 boil. 1 mystery lump. Ah, haircuts. The closest you'll get to a peaceful profession. You haul yourself upright, toss a basin of rainwater on your face, and drag your stool outside. The sun isn't fully up, but someone's already waiting. He's slumped under the barber pole, red and white, symbolizing blood and bandages. You painted it yourself with pig's blood and chalk. Charming. Your first customer is a thatcher with a nest of tangled hair and enough lice to warrant their own village. You drape a ragged sheet over his shoulders and begin snipping. The scissors squeak with each slice. You fall into rhythm. Snip. Flick. Scratch. Shake out the lice. Repeat. You offer a little small talk about the market, which pigs escaped from the slaughter pen this week, and whether or not the miller's new wife is an actual witch. Historians still argue whether barbers were considered doctors, therapists, or simply cheaper alternatives to the town exorcist. But one thing is certain, your shop is a gossip hub. While you clip away layers of grime and hair, he mentions a sore on his neck that hums at night. You raise an eyebrow. He insists. You promise to look after the haircut. Once you've trimmed the haystack down to something vaguely human, you inspect the sore. It's round, red, oozing, and, yep, it's humming. Well, he is humming. Turns out he's just got an infected insect bite and a mild flair for drama. You smear some garlic paste on it and tell him to avoid spirits. Both the drinking kind and the haunting kind. Next up is a young lad wanting his beard shaped. It's barely visible, more peach fuzz than facial hair, but he's eager. You nod seriously and make a show of sharpening your shears. While you trim, he asks nervously about a strange bump near his ribs. You feel around gently and locate a small, tender swelling. Probably a lymph node. Possibly a witch's curse. Hard to say without divine intervention or at least a second opinion from your leeches. You smear some pig fat on it, wrap it in cloth, and send him off with advice to avoid cabbage and angry dogs. Sound advice for anyone, really. You break for a quick meal, half a boiled turnip and the leftover ale you didn't drink last night. It tastes like warm socks. You drink it anyway. Afternoon rolls around with the sound of someone pounding on your door. It's the baker's wife, dragging her teenage son behind her. He's pale, sweating, and holding his side like it's trying to escape. He has a lump, she says. We think it's a sin. You sigh. You don't treat sins. Not directly, anyway. But you do treat lumps. He lies on the bench while you peel back his tunic and prod around. The lump is soft, squishy, and emits a faintly unpleasant odor when pressed. You look up and see his mother crossing herself. Could be a boil, you say. Could be the devil, she whispers. You nod. Same treatment, either way. You heat your knife in the fire, let it cool just enough not to cauterize on contact, then make a small incision. It spurts. Yellow, then green. The smell hits your nose and socks you in the brain. Your apprentice makes it halfway out the door before vomiting into the weeds. You clean the wound, pack it with mashed garlic and moss, and wrap it up tight. You give the boy a halfpenny for being brave, and his mother leaves you with a fresh loaf of bread, which you eye suspiciously. It's still warm. That's rare. Maybe the boil was a blessing in disguise. As you clean your knife, you reflect on the curious way people treat haircuts and minor surgery like the same thing. But they're used to it. Barbers are surgeons, surgeons are barbers, and if you have a steady hand and don't cry too much, you'll be in demand. Of course, there are limits. You once had a man ask for a haircut and a mole removal in the same visit. You agreed. Midway through the haircut, he passed out. Not from the surgery, from your cologne, which is mostly vinegar and mint steeped in goat bladder. By early evening, your back is killing you again, and your knees feel like they've been hammered by an enthusiastic blacksmith. You lean on your stool and glance at the tools laid out before you: scissors, razors, tweezers, lancets, cloths, salves. None of it very clean. All of it very necessary. You think briefly about quitting. Maybe becoming a monk. Or a shepherd. Sheep don't complain. Or bleed on you. Or accuse you of sin-based lumps. But then a boy runs up with a note from the manor house. The local squire has a sensitive boil in a delicate place, and they request your services before sundown. You sigh, gather your tools, and grab the softest cloth you own. You'll need it. You walk up the hill, the sunset bleeding red into the clouds. You pass the inn where villagers drink and laugh and gossip. Someone waves. Someone else holds up a mug and shouts, "Save me a leech for tomorrow." You nod, deadpan. I'll give you the hungriest one. You reach the manor, where a bored servant escorts you in. The squire winces as he lies back on a plush bench. You pretend not to notice how badly he's shaking. He asks if it will hurt. You say no. You lie. 10 minutes later, you walk out with a bloodied rag in your pocket and a whole silver coin in your hand. Worth it. You return to your hut as the last light fades, dreaming of clean towels, quiet days, and the impossible future where you only cut hair. You don't sleep well. Again. The night is hot and sticky, and your dreams are full of pus-filled faces and giggling leeches. You roll over and accidentally crush a flea between your shoulder blades. That's your third one this week. A personal best. The sun peeks in, and already your bones ache like you've been beaten with a broom handle wrapped in regret. You sit up and rub your eyes. Today's first visit isn't coming to you, you're going to them. A plague house. Just the phrase sends a shiver down your spine. You prepare as best you can. Which is to say, you throw on your second least filthy tunic, wrap a damp cloth around your nose, and dunk your tools in vinegar. Your version of protective gear. You've heard of doctors in far-off cities wearing long-nosed masks stuffed with herbs, but that sounds a bit dramatic. Besides, herbs are expensive, and your mask would just smell like onion and failure. You make the walk across town to the plague house, a small, boarded-up cottage with a painted red X on the door and a silence so heavy it makes your ears ring. A neighbor points without speaking. You nod grimly and knock with the butt of your lancet. No answer. You push open the door. It creaks slowly, as if even it doesn't want to be here. Inside, the smell hits you, something between sour milk, rotting meat, and wet wool. You gag, but only a little. You've smelled worse. Probably. The patient lies on a straw-stuffed mattress, barely conscious. His skin is pale, lips cracked, and there's a large, angry swelling in his armpit. The telltale bubo. Swollen lymph nodes like overripe plums. You'd be excited, if it weren't so horrible. You move in carefully, trying not to step on the rags soaked in dark fluid. You kneel beside him and check for breath. It's shallow, but present. You prod the swelling gently. It twitches. Not a good sign. You've heard all kinds of plague cures, carrying crushed emeralds in your shoes, sniffing rosewater, or avoiding baths for 6 months. You don't bother with any of that. You reach for your blade. Historians still argue whether lancing buboes actually helped plague patients, or just sped up the inevitable. But back then, the logic was simple: cut it open, drain the poison, and hope the body holds on. You pierce the skin and the fluid pours out, thick, blackish red, and foul enough to make your eyes water. You pack the wound with rags soaked in garlic mash, say a quiet prayer, and bind the arm. The man mutters something you don't catch. You leave a cup of water near his hand and head for the door, your feet sticky with God knows what. Outside, you exhale deeply and try not to think about the fact that you just got plague juice on your sandals. You stop by the stream on the way back and scrub your hands raw with sand and cold water. It's the closest thing you have to soap. You imagine the leeches back home applauding your technique. When you return to your hut, your apprentice is waiting, pale and twitchy. You were at that house, he whispers. Yes, you grunt. He hands you a note. 2 more want you. Same symptoms. You sit heavily on your stool and stare at the wall. It's beginning again. The Black Death, the pestilence, the great mortality, whatever people call it now, you've seen what it does. 1/3 of the town gone in months. Bodies in carts, priests mumbling last rites like it's a song stuck in their heads. You once saw a man dig his own grave, lie down in it, and wait. You thought it was over. But maybe it never really ends. You sharpen your knife again, though it barely needs it. Just something to do with your hands. Your apprentice lights a candle, though it's midday. You don't argue. You eat lunch slowly, a handful of barley mush and a slice of something pretending to be cheese. You chew and think about the patient's eyes, how empty they looked, like the light had packed up and left early. That afternoon, you receive another visitor. She's wrapped in a cloak, even though the heat is unbearable, and she holds a bundle close to her chest. You motion for her to sit. She doesn't. She unwraps the bundle. It's a child, maybe 5, burning with fever and shaking like a leaf. You don't need to check for buboes. You can see one under the jaw, swelling like it's trying to grow its own face. The mother looks at you with wide, desperate eyes. You nod slowly and reach for your cloth. You do what you can. You lance the swelling, pack it with rags, and whisper soft reassurances. The child whimpers once, then falls still. Breathing, but barely. The mother offers you a single silver button. You take it. Later, you sit outside your hut, watching the sun dip low, a leech squirming lazily in its jar beside you. You wonder if plague follows you like a shadow, or if it was always here, waiting, just out of sight. You used to think of barbering as a way to help people. Now, it feels like you're just plugging holes in a sinking ship with blood-soaked cloth. Still, you keep showing up. Because who else will? The next morning, your hands shake as you try to light the fire. It takes longer than usual. The flint slips, your thumb bleeds a little, and the kindling refuses to catch. Maybe the wood is damp. Maybe it's just that you haven't slept properly since the plague call. You finally manage a small flame and hunch over it with your bowl of oat paste. It tastes like glue and shame. But it's warm, and that's something. Outside, someone knocks, a loud, urgent thumping. You barely have time to grunt before the door opens and in stumbles a man wrapped in an old soldier's cloak. He's missing an eye, has 3 visible scars, and smells strongly of horse. He drops a satchel on your table. I need a barber. And not the kind that fusses with curls. You nod slowly. This kind of visitor doesn't want small talk. He drops his cloak. Underneath, his left arm is bandaged from wrist to shoulder, the fabric already dark with blood. I got into something sharp, he mutters. You gently unwrap the cloth, layer by layer. What you find isn't good. A deep gash, torn and jagged, likely from a blade or a very angry farming implement. The wound is wide open, full of dried blood and dirt. You lean back and sigh. This is above your pay grade. But you'll do it anyway. You clean the wound with vinegar, though it's more symbolic than effective. The man doesn't flinch. You respect that. Most people scream. Some even cry. This one stares at the wall like he's in a different century. You heat your needle in the fire and thread it with gut string from the jar beside the leeches. The leeches seem annoyed at the competition. As you sew, your apprentice hands you fresh cloths and tries not to faint. Again. Halfway through stitching, the man tells you about his time fighting in Flanders. About watching a priest dig latrines because all the diggers were dead. About how he once cauterized his own thigh with a red-hot spoon. You believe him. He has the look of someone who's lost more than just blood. You patch him up as best you can and pour him a cup of weak ale. He drinks it in one gulp, slaps a silver coin on the table, and leaves without another word. Later that day, a boy arrives with a rolled parchment sealed in red wax. The guild. You sigh. You've had trouble with them before, the official surgeons who wear fine cloaks, speak Latin, and look down on anyone who uses the wrong words for bones. You, technically, are not a full guild member. You're something worse, a tolerated exception. Barbers are allowed to do minor surgeries, lancing, stitching, even amputations if no one's looking too closely, but they aren't supposed to step into real surgery territory. Whatever that means. The letter is a polite warning. You've been reported for treating plague victims without guild sanction. Someone doesn't like that you're getting too many patients. Or too much coin. Or too much attention. Historians still argue whether the barber-surgeon line was ever clear, or if it was just blurry enough to keep both sides angry. You crumple the letter and toss it into the fire. Let them come. You clean your tools with a bit more care that evening. You polish the blades, scrub the tweezers, and even boil your scissors for good measure. Not because of the guild, but because tomorrow, you're teaching. Your apprentice, the pale, twitchy one, has lasted longer than the last 3. That's a record. He deserves a lesson. You show him the lancet first. A thin triangle of metal, deceptively simple. You place it in his hand. Not too deep, you say. Unless you want to see their breakfast come out. He nods, sweating. Then you show him how to sharpen the bone saw. Always toward the edge. If it pulls, you're doing it wrong. If it sticks, you're killing them slower. You hand him a pig's foot to practice on. He nearly faints when the first tendon snaps. You shake your head. Better the pig than the baker's cousin. You go over poultices next: garlic, onion, honey, moss, even crushed frog skin. He makes a face. You shrug. Some of them work. Some just smell bad enough to scare the fever out. As night falls, you test him on knots. His fingers fumble, but eventually he ties a neat ligature. You nod. Good. You're halfway to not being useless. That night, as you lie by the fire, you think about the guild letter. The line between barbers and surgeons has always been more politics than skill. You think about the nobleman who died after a real surgeon bled him dry, and how you stitched his servant's leg back on, more or less, and sent him hobbling home with all his toes. You think about the people who come to you because you charge less, listen longer, and have hands that shake only after the job is done. You think about the red and white pole outside, and how it's both an invitation and a warning. You drift off imagining a future where barbers no longer bleed people, where scalpels are clean, and where no one blinks at a surgeon with dirty boots and a pile of garlic in his pouch. Unlikely. But pleasant. You're up before the rooster. For once, not because you're woken by pain or plague or screaming, it's because you've got an apprentice to train, and that's somehow even more exhausting than draining pus from a drunk nobleman's backside. The fire crackles quietly as you set out 2 stools. One for you, one for him. He sits like a nervous sack of potatoes, clutching his belt and staring at the tools in front of him as though they might bite. First rule, you say, holding up a lancet: don't stab yourself. He nods, wide-eyed. You pass him the bluntest of your scalpels and a turnip with a lump carved into it. Boil practice, you explain. No screaming this time. He looks vaguely insulted, but says nothing. That's progress. While he pokes at the root vegetable, you glance over your ledger. You've got 2 villagers lined up for minor procedures, a drunken thatcher with a suspiciously swollen knee, and, lucky you, a noble family sending their steward for wart removal. That last one pays in real coin and meat pies, so you circle it twice. The first patient arrives, hobbling in with a twisted look on his face and a cloth wrapped around his wrist. Bitten, he grunts. Pig. You sigh. Pigs don't usually go for hands unless provoked, and judging by the smell of ale on his breath, he probably deserved it. You unwrap the cloth. The bite's deep, with torn flesh and grime packed in the wound like a poorly cooked stew. Your apprentice leans in for a look, turns green, and leans back just as fast. You clean it, slowly, explaining every step. Boil the cloth. Pour the vinegar. Scrub with salt. Yes, it stings. Good. That means it's not dead yet. The man winces but holds still. You stitch the bite closed with practiced hands, the apprentice watching closely. You let him tie the last knot. It's a little loose, but you say nothing. Let him have his victories. After the pig man limps out, you move on to a woman with a mole on her cheek, shaped like the Pope's hat. You examine it, nod solemnly, and tell her it's unlikely to start preaching, but it's probably better to remove it anyway. You heat the blade and press it gently against the skin. A quick slice, a dab of honey salve, and it's gone. You glance over. Your apprentice has fainted again. Right onto the pig blood-smeared floorboards. You step over him. The noble steward arrives mid-afternoon. He's puffed up like a roasted goose and twice as smug. He refuses to sit on your stool, opting instead to hover awkwardly while pointing to a small wart on his hand. You examine it with exaggerated seriousness. This is a difficult one, you say, rubbing your chin. Could take several days. Or just 10 minutes. He scowls. Just do it. You slice the wart free in one swift move and drop it into the fire. It hisses as it shrivels. Some say the devil lives in warts, you remark. Do they? He mutters. No. But it's more interesting than the real reason. You smile. He leaves you a silver coin and a half-eaten meat pie. You don't ask why it's half-eaten. You're just glad it's meat. Later, your apprentice stirs from the floor. You'll get used to the blood, you say, handing him a rag to wipe his face. Or you won't, and I'll find someone who does. He manages a nod, clearly too ashamed to argue. You pat his shoulder, more for morale than mentorship, and point him toward the basin. Clean the tools. All of them. Twice. He groans. Think of it this way, you add, if you clean them well, I might let you hold the scissors tomorrow. Really? No. But maybe. By sunset, the place smells like vinegar and burnt skin. You sit by the fire, sorting your needles and flossing bits of sinew off the saw teeth. You realize you haven't bled anyone today. A first. You reflect on how your apprentice is improving. He's still afraid of leeches, still jumps when people scream, and still can't tie a proper ligature to save his life, but he listens. And that's half the battle. You remember your own mentor, a hunched old man with one working eye and an attitude worse than a plague rat. He once removed a man's ear just because it looked suspicious. You never did find out what that meant. You fall into a daze thinking about your old teacher's shop, how it smelled like rotting herbs and old cheese, how the floor creaked like it was whispering curses, and how the red pole outside was painted with real blood every week to keep the spirits busy. Historians still debate whether barber poles had actual ritual significance, or if people just really liked swirling colors. Your eyes close as the fire crackles low. You dream of scissors that never dull, patients that never scream, and apprentices who ask fewer questions. Tomorrow, you'll teach him how to remove a tooth without snapping the jaw. A delicate skill. A critical skill. One he'll need if he ever wants to stop fainting and start cutting. You start the day with a bowl of something that might once have been peas. Hard to tell anymore. You eat slowly, watching your apprentice attempt to tie a surgical knot on a turnip. The turnip, sadly, is winning. Loosen your fingers, you mutter. You're trying to strangle it, not suture it. He grumbles but adjusts. His latest attempt is slightly less terrible. Progress. Today, you're focusing on one of the trickier arts in your trade, the tooth pull. Medieval dentistry, if one can call it that, relies mostly on courage, force, and prayer. You've got 2 patients booked for extractions, and 1 poor soul coming for something you can only hope isn't a dislocated jaw. The first arrives before the fire's even warm. An older woman with a grim expression and a mouthful of misery. She gestures toward her swollen cheek and hisses something about a tooth possessed by the devil. You nod sympathetically. Toothaches do make people believe in the supernatural. You ask her to sit and open wide. The smell is biblical. You resist the urge to lean back. Her molar is blackened, cracked, and clearly the source of her misery. You grab your trusty pelican, a metal contraption that resembles a cruel bird and functions like a primitive clamp. You wedge it into her mouth carefully, then brace your hand against her shoulder. She tenses. On 3, you say. 1. You pull on 2. She lets out a scream that could strip paint. The tooth comes out clean, trailing a wisp of something unpleasant. You hold it up like a trophy, then drop it in the rag bucket. She spits blood onto the floor, wipes her mouth with a sleeve, and gives you a nod of approval. It's the most gratitude you'll get all day. Historians still argue, you say aloud, mostly to your apprentice, whether barbers were better at pulling teeth than real dentists back then. But seeing as most real dentists were just butchers with a theology degree, I think we held our own. Your apprentice nods, trying not to look at the tooth still twitching in the blood-stained cloth. Next up is a man with a jaw that clicks ominously every time he talks. He claims he fell off his horse. Judging by the bruise across his face and the chipped tooth, you suspect he was thrown off a horse, and possibly by his own temper. You prod gently along the jaw. It shifts under your fingers. Not good. You explain your plan to reset the joint. He looks skeptical. I'll need you to bite down, you say, but not hard. I'm fond of my fingers. You wrap a cloth between his teeth, plant your thumbs just inside his mouth, and press with all your weight while angling his jaw back into place. There's a loud pop followed by a sound that can only be described as a muffled curse. Better, you ask, once he's stopped foaming. He nods, jaw now slightly crooked, but functional. You offer a mug of watered wine to rinse the blood away. He swishes, spits, and mutters thanks before leaving you with a small loaf of walnut bread. You cut a slice. It's stale, but not offensive. You share a bit with your apprentice, who seems faint again. You wonder if his face ever changes color toward pink. So far, it's all pale, green, and occasionally blue. Your third and final dental client of the day is a teenage girl brought in by her older brother. She's holding her cheek and sobbing quietly. Her eyes are swollen, her lips bleeding from where she's been chewing it, and she's got the unmistakable look of someone who hasn't slept in days. You soothe her as best you can, offer her a padded seat, the least bloody stool, a clean cloth, and a dab of lavender oil under the nose. Not that it helps much. The smell of tooth rot overpowers everything. Her tooth, once revealed, is an absolute disaster. Rotten to the root. It's going to take force. Lots of it. You pause for a moment and look at your apprentice. Your turn. He freezes. You hand him the pelican and position his hands. Slow and firm. Don't twist. And if it cracks, you finish the job. Leaving a root behind is worse than death. For you. He swallows hard, then gets to work. To his credit, he's careful. Clumsy, but careful. He clamps, braces, and pulls. The tooth doesn't budge. He tries again, sweat dripping down his nose. Try rocking it, you whisper. like you're teasing it out of its hole. It finally loosens with a faint pop, and he pulls it free. The girl winces but doesn't scream. Impressive. Your apprentice nearly does, though. You drop the tooth into the vinegar jar and bind her mouth with a bandage soaked in honey and herbs. Rinse daily, you tell her. No meat for 3 days. And don't try to talk. You'll just bleed on people. They leave, and your apprentice collapses onto the bench, hands shaking. You didn't faint, you say. Nearly. But you didn't. You toss him a small chunk of walnut bread. A reward. A gesture. He catches it, eyes wide. Tomorrow, you add, you pull too. His smile fades. He eats anyway. As dusk creeps in, you wash the pelican with scalding water, your hands numb from the cold. You hang it over the hearth to dry, next to your scissors and bone saw. You think again about how the barber's chair is the one place where fear and courage look exactly the same. Open mouth. Closed eyes. Trust, or desperation. To pull someone's tooth is to touch their pain. And in some strange way, to make them better. Maybe. By morning, your apprentice is up before you, looking far too eager for someone who spent the previous day wrist-deep in molars and medieval despair. He's boiled the tools, swept the floor, and even scrubbed yesterday's blood off the stool legs. You eye him suspiciously. You feeling all right? You ask. He nods too quickly. I think I like teeth now. That's disturbing, you reply, and start your breakfast. You barely have time for 3 bites of your oat mash before your first patient arrives, an elderly farmer with hands like tree roots and a cough that rattles his ribs. He sits slowly and winces as he lowers himself onto the stool. I've got something in my chest, he croaks, feels like a stone. You listen to his breath. It wheezes, gurgles, and occasionally seems to just stop altogether. There's not much you can do for lungs. No surgery for that, unless you count prayers and herbal compresses. You hand him a poultice of mustard seed, crushed garlic, and goose fat. Rub this on your chest nightly, you say. And maybe don't sleep in a barn. He nods. It's warmer in the hay. Not if you're coughing yourself to death. He leaves with a wheeze and a small pot of salve. Your apprentice scribbles something into a ledger. You glance at it. He's titled the entry, Farmer with Windy Lungs. Not exactly medical Latin, but descriptive. Your next task is far less charming, lice combing. Yes, the grand and noble task of delousing a local merchant's children. All 6 of them. They arrive like a parade of misery, scratching their heads and wearing identical frowns. You prepare a basin of vinegar water and bring out the comb, a long-toothed, finely crafted thing made from bone. It's one of your most prized tools, not because of its value, but because it works better than anything else at dragging tiny parasites from tiny skulls. You seat the first child, douse their hair with water, and start combing. The lice come out by the dozens. Your apprentice stares, horrified. You pass him the comb. Your turn. He gags, but obeys. By the 3rd child, he's barely shivering. By the 5th, he's humming a tune and smearing louse remains on a cloth with practiced flicks. You try not to laugh. Historians still argue, you say lightly, whether delousing was a true medical service or just a favor to the local gentry. Either way, it's good for business. You finish the session by applying a salve of rosemary oil and vinegar to each child's scalp. The smell is pungent, but at least they won't be scratching in church tomorrow. The merchant pays in grain. Too much, actually. Probably trying to curry favor. You nod graciously and say nothing. Midday brings something far more interesting, a visiting pilgrim who's walked from Canterbury and developed a nasty swelling on his shin. It burns, he mutters, showing you a welt the size of a duck egg. And it itches. Might be cursed. You examine the lump. It's red, blistered, and slightly crusted. Could be infected. Could be a bite. Could be the result of wearing wet wool socks for 3 weeks straight. You lance it carefully and drain the fluid, clear, thankfully. No stink, no blackness. That's good. You clean it with vinegar, smear it with honey, and wrap it up tight. The pilgrim asks if he's going to die. You shrug. Eventually. He leaves you a wooden trinket carved like a saint. Your apprentice pockets it. For luck, he says. You don't argue. Later that afternoon, you're called to a blacksmith's forge, where a young apprentice has burned his arm badly. The skin is red, blistered, and smells like roasted ham. You wince. Burns are difficult. You've seen them fester and rot within days. Your master used to coat them in mashed snails and ash. You do the same now, because, strangely enough, it seems to work. You cool the burn with clean water, smear the snail paste over it, and wrap it in linen soaked in rosewater. The boy doesn't even cry, though his jaw trembles the whole time. You offer him a strip of leather to bite, but he shakes his head. Tough kid. You tell the blacksmith to keep the wound dry and check it daily. He nods and presses a heavy iron ring into your hand. Handmade, with a swirling pattern on its surface. A fair trade. You trudge home with sore feet and arms that ache from holding people's limbs in place all day. Your apprentice walks beside you, still talking about the teeth from yesterday. That one molar was huge, he says. Like a horse tooth. Do you think people can grow extra teeth? You blink slowly. If they can, I don't want to be the one pulling them. He laughs. You don't. You're too tired. As the sun sets, you light the hearth, boil the tools, and sit by the fire. You pull out the blacksmith's ring and examine it in the firelight. It's beautiful. Heavy. A reminder that not all your work is thankless. Outside, a dog barks. Inside, the leeches wriggle in their jar. Your apprentice finishes updating the ledger, underlining, turnip with face lump, and lice tsunami, like chapter titles in a very strange book. You stare into the flames, your body still, but your mind replaying the faces, the wounds, the strange smells and stranger superstitions. There's a rhythm to this work now. A pulse. Like a heartbeat beneath the dirt and blood and ash. And tomorrow, you'll wake up, do it all again, and maybe, just maybe, someone will leave without screaming. The weather turns. Rain lashes your shutters before sunrise, wind howling like a banshee that missed her morning tea. You groan, pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, and step into your hut's main room to find your apprentice curled beside the hearth, a louse comb still tucked behind one ear like a quill. You nudge him gently with your foot. Up. We've got one coming in with a leg like a sausage. He startles awake and bumps into the leech jar. One wriggles free, squelching across the table. He stares in horror. You calmly pick it up and return it to its brethren. They don't bite unless they're hungry, you mumble. And this one's had enough of me. The patient arrives soon after, hobbling in on a stick he claims is his great-grandfather's ghost staff. You don't ask. His leg is indeed swollen, red, and warm to the touch. Could be a simple infection, or something worse. Feels like it's got a heartbeat, he whispers, sweating. You inspect the skin. It's tight and shiny. Not a good sign. You press gently around the edge. He gasps. This is going to be unpleasant, you say with all the softness of a saw blade. But better now than when it bursts on its own. You heat your lancet, clean the site, and prepare your apprentice. Hold the leg steady. If he kicks, let go. I like my fingers attached. You make the cut. Pus erupts, thick, yellow, with a faint whiff of mushrooms. The man screams loud enough to wake the saints. Your apprentice flinches but doesn't drop the leg. Small victories. You clean the wound and pack it with a paste of boiled nettle and honey. Historians still argue whether these herbal mixtures truly helped or if they just delayed the inevitable. But you've seen wounds close. You've seen infections calm. Sometimes the old ways work, whether anyone understands them or not. The man pays you with a hen. It lays an egg immediately on your floor. You name it Mildred. You barely have time to clean up before your next appointment, a midwife with a dislocated shoulder. She fell while chasing a goat that stole her apron. This seems like something only midwives do. You sit her down and ask her to describe the pain. She waves the question off. Just pop it back in. I've got babies to catch. You admire her grit. You rotate her arm carefully, feel the joint, and brace against your stool. This might hurt, you say. I've birthed twins in a thunderstorm. You nod and shove. A crunch, a yelp, and a satisfied sigh later, her shoulder is back where it belongs. She flexes it once, then wraps her scarf around the joint and nods her thanks. On her way out, she tosses you a small pouch of dried rosehips. For bleeding gums, she says. You pocket them. Midday brings the local miller, who's convinced his ear has been possessed by wind spirits. You've dealt with this man before. He once brought you a perfectly normal wart and demanded a full exorcism. You inspect his ear. It's red, a bit crusty, but definitely unhaunted. Probably just infected from scratching with a spoon, you mutter. He looks defensive. You clean the area and apply a compress soaked in warmed vinegar and thyme. You resist the urge to chant. Barely. Cover it. Don't poke it. And no more spoons. He nods solemnly and leaves, likely already forming a new theory about spirits in his elbow. Your apprentice, now confident enough to clean tools without prompting, asks an earnest question: do people always lie about how they got their injuries? You glance up from the herb shelf. Always. You reflect aloud. No one falls from ladders, they challenge them. No one burns their hand, they negotiate with the fire and lose. Everyone's a hero in their version. He scribbles this into the ledger under observations. His handwriting's getting better. By late afternoon, you're visited by a young monk who claims he's got the devil's rash. That's never a good opener. You inspect it, clusters of red welts creeping across his back. Could be anything, you mutter. Fleas. Mites. Wheat mold. Sin. He laughs nervously. You don't. You mix a salve of lavender, beeswax, and powdered clay and instruct him to apply it twice a day. Also to avoid sharing robes. Monks are not known for their hygiene. Or personal space. As he leaves, he asks if there's a patron saint for skin rashes. You pause. Saint Scholastica. Really? No. I just like the name. He chuckles and disappears into the rain. You spend the evening sorting your herb stores. The mint's gone musty, the rosemary's brittle, but the comfort still smells of green life. You make a mental note to trade for more yarrow and maybe a clean strip of linen if the brewer's wife is feeling generous. Your apprentice sits quietly by the fire, reading a scrap of old parchment with anatomical drawings. He squints at a kidney that looks more like a bean with legs. Are we ever going to work on insides? He asks. You look at him. No. He opens his mouth. No. He goes back to reading. The rain drums harder on the roof. Outside, the world is mud and mist. Inside, the fire crackles and the leeches bob gently in their jar. You finish labeling a jar of dried marigold with a shaky hand. Your fingers aren't what they were. But your eyes are sharp. And tomorrow, you're removing a toenail from the blacksmith's son. Just another day in paradise. You wake to the sound of chickens screaming. Not people. Actual chickens. Mildred, the hen from yesterday, appears to be asserting dominance in the yard, flapping around like she owns the lease on your roof. You nod respectfully. She's earned it. Inside, your apprentice is already up, feeding the fire and sorting tools. He's humming, badly, but it's enthusiasm, and you've learned not to squash that. At least not before breakfast. Today's list is short but grim. The blacksmith's son is due in for a toenail removal. There's a baker with a suspected hernia. And a priest who thinks he's been cursed by an evil eye after officiating a wedding that resulted in instant divorce. The blacksmith's boy arrives first. He's 10, silent, and glaring at you like you personally insulted his entire bloodline. His foot is wrapped tightly in rags, already soaked through with something that smells faintly of mold and regret. You seat him, unwrap the bandages, and grimace. The nail is swollen, discolored, and lifting like it's trying to abandon ship. One more week and it probably would have fallen off into his boot. Ready, you ask. He nods, but his knuckles are white from gripping the stool. You take out your nail knife, small, curved, and surprisingly elegant for something designed to make people cry. You hold the foot, you tell your apprentice. And if he kicks? Let go. You begin. Toenail removals are an art form, a brutal, squelchy, eye-watering art form. You work carefully, sliding the blade under the edge, lifting just enough to sever the nail bed, and there it goes. The boy lets out a high-pitched yelp, like a kettle boiling over. You bandage the wound with linen soaked in wine and lavender, whisper something that could be interpreted as comfort, and send him home with a lump of beeswax to chew on. Historians still argue whether wine was truly antiseptic, or if people were just desperate for an excuse to bathe everything in it. Either way, it makes the bleeding prettier. You don't get long to clean up before the baker arrives. A large man, all belly and beard, waddling into your hut with the grace of an overstuffed pastry. He groans dramatically and lifts his shirt to reveal a swollen lump just above the groin. Hernia, he mutters, or maybe a demon. Probably bread-related, you reply. You inspect the lump. Definitely a hernia. The flesh bulges when he coughs, pushing through the abdominal wall like dough through a tear in a sack. Surgery's risky. You've done it before, but always with trembling hands and lots of yelling. And usually only when the patient's halfway to death already. Today, though, you have another idea. You press the lump back in gently, then wrap his belly tightly in a linen binder soaked in vinegar and egg white. Don't lift anything heavier than a feather for a week, you warn. And if it pops out again, lie down and scream until I get there. He nods solemnly and offers you a bag of barley as payment. You accept. Next, the priest. He arrives in full robes, which you suspect he never removes, and claims he's been spiritually poisoned. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. What symptoms, you ask? I feel watched. You stare. And my teeth itch. You blink. Also, I sneezed 9 times yesterday. Well, you say, that is suspicious. You check him for visible ailments, skin, normal. Eyes, slightly bloodshot but nothing cursed. Breath, faintly garlicky, perhaps from spiritual combat. You boil a pot of rosemary and mint, wave it under his nose, and chant a nonsense phrase that sounds vaguely Latin but is really just your old master's snoring pattern. You hand him a sachet of dried sage and instruct him to sleep with it under his pillow. Will it ward off the evil? No, but it smells nicer than your socks. He leaves, looking almost disappointed that he hasn't been diagnosed with something more exotic. You spend the afternoon organizing your poultices. The garlic paste has turned blue, concerning, and the snail salve smells like despair. You make fresh batches, your apprentice watching closely. Why snails? He asks. Because frogs bite. You also mix a new batch of poppy syrup, for pain, and label it with a skull. Not because it's poisonous, but because people take it too eagerly. A dose helps. 2 doses makes you think you're a cloud. 3, and you're talking to dead relatives about beetroot. You check on the leeches. They're sluggish today. You feed them a drop of pig blood, watching them swell like tiny water skins. Your apprentice asks, do you think we'll always do this? Cut and boil and guess. You glance up. Probably. But what if one day there's something better? You pause. Then I hope we never live to see it. It'd ruin our business. He laughs, but you know the truth. There's talk of universities. Of scholars writing books with diagrams and instructions that don't involve frogs or wine. Some barbers scoff at it. Others tremble. You just keep showing up. As night falls, a neighbor stops by, holding her daughter's wrist. She fell, the woman says. Now it's crooked. The girl sniffles. Her wrist is swollen, twisted slightly out of line. You make her a sling, soak her fingers in cool water, and gently ease the bones back into place. A tiny pop. A sharp cry. Then silence. You splint it, bind it, and offer her a boiled sweet. You don't know where it came from, but it's soft and she smiles. They leave with murmured thanks. You sit beside the fire, your fingers sore, your back aching, your stomach rumbling. Your apprentice brings you a cup of watered wine and places the ledger in your lap. Today's entries include, possessed hernia, whiny priest, and toothless chicken ambassador. That last one is clearly a joke. You smile. Outside, the wind is quieter tonight. Inside, you feel, for just a moment, like maybe you've done some good. The next morning, you wake to a quiet so thick it presses against your ears. No screaming chickens. No banging shutters. Just the gentle creak of the rafters and the faint wheeze of your apprentices snoring from the corner. You stretch slowly, each joint complaining like a disgruntled monk. Your hands are stiff, your knees ache, and your back feels like it's made of old cartwheels and regret. But you've got work to do. You light the hearth, boil water, and start preparing for the day's tasks. Today's list is odd. First up, a man claiming to have been cursed with invisible boils. Then a child who swallowed a pebble, and finally, an aging tanner who insists something is growing out of his back and wants you to cut it off before it develops opinions. You don't write the schedule, you just follow it. The first patient arrives bundled in furs, mumbling to himself about a neighbor's evil eye. He swears he feels lumps under his skin, though none are visible. You prod his arms, back, and chest, nothing. Not even a bump. You try distraction. Perhaps it's guilt, you offer gently. You wronged someone recently. His face pales. I may have overwatered my brother's mead barrel. You nod solemnly. That'll do it. You hand him a jar of mashed mint and marigold and instruct him to rub it on the boils each night while reciting a short poem. You make one up on the spot about purging wicked humors and mead-related crimes. He pays with dried mushrooms and a carved button shaped like a horse. You've received weirder. Next, the pebble-swallowing child. She's about 5, wide-eyed and entirely unbothered. Her mother, on the other hand, is in full meltdown. She said it was magic, the woman says, waving her arms. She ate magic. You ask the girl what happened. It looked shiny, she explains, and the cat dared me. You nod. Perfectly logical. You have no way of removing the pebble unless it gets stuck, which, judging by her lack of discomfort, it hasn't. Give her broth and plenty of soft bread, you advise. Nature will do the rest. The mother looks horrified. You mean it'll come out? Preferably not as a necklace. She leaves clutching her daughter and muttering about monks and demons. Your apprentice watches the whole scene, fascinated. Should we follow up, he asks. Only if she starts glowing, you say. The final visit of the morning is the tanner, a man built like a barn door, wearing more leather than skin. He grunts a greeting and removes his tunic, revealing a lump on his upper back the size of a goose egg. It's firm, slightly red, and clearly causing him pain. You prod it gently. It doesn't wiggle. That's always a good sign. Likely a cyst, you mutter. Kill it, he growls. Before it learns to talk. You heat your scalpel, clean the area, and make a small incision. Thick, yellowish goo oozes out, filling the air with the unmistakable scent of spoiled cheese and forgotten fish. Your apprentice gags audibly. You squeeze the cyst gently, drawing out the rest of the muck. Then clean the wound, pack it with moss and honey, and bandage it tight. You'll live, you say. No signs of sentience. The tanner grunts again, tosses you a strip of oiled hide, and leaves with the posture of someone who's permanently mad at clouds. Later, you send your apprentice to fetch more supplies, specifically clean linen, fresh thyme, and something resembling soap. While he's out, a cloaked woman appears at your door. She speaks softly. I need discretion. You nod. It's always that line. She reveals a rash across her inner arm, small blisters, red and ringed, forming patterns. Could be eczema. Could be witchcraft. Who's to say? You dab a bit of vinegar on one. She flinches. I burned a spell, she says quietly, then bathed. You suppress a smirk. That'll do it. You mix her a salve of rose oil and ground barley. Something simple. Something soothing. You tell her to avoid spell burning in future. She nods and leaves as silently as she came. Historians still argue whether barbers were the secret therapists of their time, less qualified, more accessible, and entirely too curious for their own good. Your apprentice returns with half the list: time, yes. Soap, no. Linen, possibly stolen. Don't ask, he says. The vendor had a pig and a large stick. You pour a bit of wine and sit beside the fire. Outside, the sky is turning violet. Inside, you sort herbs, mend a torn pouch, and listen to your apprentice hum again. It's still awful, but it's comfortingly awful now. You show him how to bind a wrist properly, using one of your own as the model. Not too tight. Not too loose. If the fingers go blue, you've failed. He frowns, adjusts the knot, and earns a nod of approval. You test him with more wrapping, then move on to something trickier: how to cut a wart without slicing an artery. You give him a turnip and a blunt knife. He looks insulted. It has nerves, you lie. Be careful. You reflect as he fumbles. Most barbers don't train apprentices. Too dangerous. Too messy. Too expensive. But you remember what it felt like to be the one standing silently in the corner, wondering if you'd ever be allowed to hold the good scissors. So, you teach. Not perfectly. Not kindly. But consistently. Night settles in with a hush. The wind is soft. The fire crackles. Mildred the hen roosts on a stool like royalty. You sit back and wonder what tomorrow will bring. Hopefully not more pebble eating. But you're ready, just in case. The day begins not with a knock or a scream, but with a song. You're midway through sipping something lukewarm that once resembled broth when a voice outside your door belts out a vaguely in-tune ballad about healing hands and blessed scissors. You open the door cautiously. Standing there is a bard. At least, you assume he's a bard. He has a lute, an oversized feather in his cap, and the unmistakable aura of someone who once tried to charm a cow. He bows deeply. "Good barber," he says, "I have injured my pride, and my knee." "Which one are we fixing?" you ask. He chuckles, limps in, and reveals a swollen, bruised joint. Tried to leap over a cart during a love song. Cart 1. Emphatically. You inspect the knee. Nothing broken, but the swelling is impressive. You gently manipulate the joint, checking for looseness. Nothing rattles. That's good. You smear it with a poultice of crushed yarrow and clay, then wrap it with linen soaked in wine. Keep off it for 3 days. And no serenades involving furniture. He nods solemnly, then offers you a song in return. You decline. He sings anyway. Your apprentice, to his credit, doesn't cry. After the bard leaves, still humming, you notice a boy peering in the window. You beckon him in. He's maybe 12, barefoot, and holding a dead rat by the tail. "Something bit it," he says. "Thought you'd want to see." You blink. "Why?" "Figured it's medical." You examine the rat. A chunk is missing from its side, possibly a dog, possibly another rat, possibly the boy himself. You nod, take the rat, mostly to make him leave, and promise to investigate. You make a mental note to bury it later. Or feed it to the leeches. They've been restless. Before you can clean your hands, the baker's apprentice stumbles in, eyes wide and clutching his stomach. "I ate too much yeast," he groans. You blink again. He continues. "We had extra. I dared myself." Of course he did. You sit him down, press gently on his abdomen, and confirm that yes, it feels like he's baking bread in there. He's bloated, gassy, and possibly fermenting from the inside out. Walk around the village, you suggest. Quickly. And avoid open flames. He waddles off, clutching his belly. Will he explode? Your apprentice whispers. Only if the wind changes, you reply. Mid-morning brings the cobbler, whose hand is infected from stitching leather with a rusty needle. His palm is swollen, the cut red and streaked. You shake your head. Did you clean the needle? It was in wine. You sigh. Not the same. You open the wound, drain the pus, and pack it with crushed garlic and moss. The smell is memorable. Don't work for 3 days, you tell him. He scoffs. I've got soles to patch. Use your feet. He doesn't laugh. You barter for a pair of half-finished shoes in exchange. They're mismatched, but sturdier than your current pair. You take them. Later, you visit the widow by the well. She's not ill, but her son has a cough and she worries it's the wet lung. You inspect him. He's thin, pale, and wheezing, but his eyes are alert. Not consumption, you hope. You prepare a tincture of licorice root and anise, instruct her to warm it over the hearth and add a pinch of soot. She nods gravely. Will he get better? You shrug. Most do. Some don't. The trick is not to die trying. She thanks you with a single apple. Slightly bruised. You eat it anyway. Back at your hut, your apprentice is boiling cloth. He's finally stopped fainting. You teach him how to blend a proper balm, one that doesn't congeal into something resembling cheese. He listens. He asks questions. Why does nettle sting but also heal? You pause. Because nature likes to be ironic. You show him your herb wall, rows of tied bundles, some dried to dust, others still fragrant. You let him crush lavender between his fingers. You watch him smell rosemary and smile. Historians still argue whether barbers were true healers, you say. But if you knew what to look for, you could become more than just a bloodletter. He nods, then asks to prepare the next compress himself. You agree. Evening brings one last visitor, a stonemason with a broken nose. He tripped on his own chisel, he says. You don't ask how. The nose is swollen and crooked. You brace his face, tell him to breathe through his mouth, and realign it with a quick, brutal push. He yelps. You hold it in place with a bandage fashioned from linen and beeswax. Keep it straight. No sneezing. He hands you a small carving of a fox as thanks. It's lovely. You place it on the shelf next to the carved horse button and your master's old tooth-pulling pliers. As the night settles in, your apprentice finally asks something he's been holding onto for weeks. Why do we do all this? You stare into the fire. Because people break, you say. And someone has to patch them back together. He nods slowly. But what if we can't fix them? Then we comfort them. Or distract them. Or lie convincingly. Outside, the rain returns, soft now, tapping the roof like a lullaby. Inside, you clean your tools, check your leeches, and pour a small cup of wine. Tomorrow will bring more swelling. More rashes. More strange, half-believable stories. But you'll be here. So will he. And maybe that's enough. The weather holds steady in that damp, chilly sort of way that makes joints ache and soup taste better than it actually is. You wake up before the rooster, stretch with a creak and pop, and catch your apprentice attempting to trim his own hair using your dullest scissors and no mirror. You want a new nickname, you ask. He freezes. No. Because that's how you get one. You start the fire, boil water, and go over the schedule scratched into the wax tablet beside your bed. Today you're expecting a shepherd with a twisted ankle, a woman convinced her hair is possessed, and, your favorite, an official from the local lord's estate, coming to inspect your practice. Wonderful. The shepherd arrives first, limping dramatically, face smudged with ash and something you hope is mud. He refuses to remove his boots. I twisted it in a ditch full of secrets, he mutters. Were any of them useful? Only to the sheep. You coax the boot off, slowly. His ankle is swollen, but not broken. You dab it with a warming salve of mustard seed and vinegar, wrap it snugly, and instruct him to avoid uneven ground. He nods, pulls out a wrinkled pouch of cheese, and offers you a chunk the size of a baby's fist. You accept with hesitation and tuck it behind a pot where it can't offend anyone until winter. Next is the woman with the haunted hair. She marches in, eyes wild, strands sticking out in every direction. It moves on its own, she hisses. Like snakes. You raise an eyebrow, gesture for her to sit, and gently part her hair with your fingers. Ah! Lice. And more than a few. You comb through gently, catching enough of them to confirm your diagnosis, and to set your own scalp tingling in sympathy. You prepare a mixture of vinegar, rosemary oil, and crushed mint, and massage it into her scalp. Sleep with this on, you instruct. Rinse in the morning. Repeat until the snakes leave. She thanks you with a small coin and a warning that her cousin might be possessed by cheese demons. You nod. You've heard worse. Midday brings the Lord's official. He's clean, stiff, and smells faintly of cloves and ego. His boots don't have a speck of mud on them. He steps into your hut like it's a leper colony. Inspection, he says, holding out a scroll with more wax than text. We're standardizing health practices across the district. You look unimpressed. Let me guess, based on the bishop's cousin's ideas about what a good bloodletting looks like. He doesn't blink. Something like that. You show him around. The tools are clean. The herbs are labeled. The leeches are lively. He checks your ledger, raises an eyebrow at entries like ghost knee and unfriendly boil, but says nothing. Your apprentice hands him a freshly made compress. He sniffs it, nods, and scribbles something on the scroll. Acceptable, he says. You resist the urge to curtsy. As he leaves, he pauses. You know, some believe the future of healing lies with scholars. Universities. Men in robes. You gesture to your blood-stained apron. Mine's cleaner. He doesn't laugh. You close the door behind him and mutter something unsaintly under your breath. Later, a boy arrives with a sprained wrist. He got it arm wrestling a pig, apparently. You don't ask for details. You bind the wrist, give him a dried fig, and send him home with instructions to stop challenging livestock. Historians still argue, you tell your apprentice, whether medieval pigs were particularly aggressive, or if people were just unusually bad at staying upright. He snorts and returns to stirring a new batch of honey salve. As the afternoon fades, you get a surprise visitor, an old barber, one of your former rivals, now hunched and mumbling. He holds out a cracked jar. Inside, a wart he swears grew teeth. You stare. It laughed at me, he says. Mocked me while I slept. You sigh and motion him to sit. The thwart is nothing more than a dried-out scab clinging to a tail that's grown with the years. You listen, clean it gently, and place a few drops of rose oil over the skin. There. Exorcised. He nods solemnly and leaves behind an old razor, curved and beautifully made. A quiet thank you for treating the story more than the wound. As dusk settles, your apprentice practices tying splints with chicken bones. You let him. It's good practice. The chicken is unimpressed but cooperative. You reflect, quietly, on the people who come to you, not just for healing, but for certainty. For touch. For stories that end with, "You'll be alright." Even when they might not be. You wash your hands in lavender water, trim the candle wicks, and write today's entries in the ledger. Titles include Haunted Hare, Inquisitor of Bandages, and Pig Wrestler. You smile. Outside, the sky is turning dark blue, a soft wind ruffling the herb bundles hanging from the rafters. Inside, the fire crackles, the leeches sway in their jar, and Mildred clucks softly in her sleep. You have one last thing to do tonight: sharpen your tools. Not for tomorrow's tasks, though there will be plenty, but because there's something sacred in the sound of steel on stone. A ritual. A rhythm. A reminder that you're still here. And that, somehow, matters. You wake stiff. Not the usual, slept weird, stiffness, but that full body, bone-deep ache that whispers, "You're not young anymore, friend." Your apprentice, by contrast, is bouncing. He's swept, boiled, even labeled a new jar of wormwood with handwriting that's almost legible. He grins as he pours tea. "Big day today," he chirps. You grunt in reply. The list today is full. A mason with split fingers, a woman complaining of a weeping eye, a butcher who swears something's wrong with his spleen, and a man who simply wants to know if he's dying. That last one is more common than you'd expect. The mason arrives with palms that look like the surface of a crumbling wall, cracked, bleeding, rough as bark. You soak his hands in warm rosemary water and carefully smear them with goose fat and crushed plantain. He winces but doesn't pull away. "You should wear gloves." He raises an eyebrow. "What's a glove?" "Fair enough." He leaves with wrapped hands and a roll of twine as payment. You never ask where these things come from anymore. Next is the woman with the weeping eye. She's quiet, stoic, with a handkerchief pressed firmly to her cheek. "It just started leaking," she says. "Won't stop." You remove the cloth gently. Her eye is inflamed, rimmed with red, and indeed leaking a constant, thin stream of fluid. Could be conjunctivitis. Could be something older, stranger. Some believe it was a sign of second sight, of being touched by unseen things. You don't say that. You mix a simple solution of salt, vinegar, and a drop of honey, then instruct her to dab it 3 times daily. She hands you a coin and thanks you without meeting your gaze. You wish her well. Some people never stop leaking. Physically or otherwise. The butcher arrives next, thudding into your hut like a barrel of hooves. He's got a hand on his side and a look of dramatic doom. "I think it's my spleen," he grunts. You look at him. "What makes you think that?" "It aches when I laugh. Or breathe. Or sit. Or stand." That's not specific. You prod gently. It's likely a pulled muscle, or possibly wind, but he insists it's something darker. "Could be humors," he says. "Or that curse from the market hag." You hand him a ginger compress and a jar of peppermint syrup. "Apply this. Drink that. And maybe apologize to the hag." He nods gravely. "Too late. I ate her goose." You sigh. "Definitely cursed, then." As he leaves, he tosses you a wrapped bundle, 2 sausages and a cracked bone-handled knife. You smile. Barter is its own language. The last visitor is quiet. Middle-aged. Pale. I don't feel right, he murmurs. Like something's off. Like death is looking for me. You guide him to the stool, ask a few questions. He's not bleeding. No fever. No clear symptoms, just a gnawing dread. You've seen this before. There's no compress for this. No poultice. You boil a bit of thyme and lavender, pour it into a cup, and set it in his hands. Drink this. Walk in the sun. Talk to someone who doesn't sell teeth. He nods. So I'm not dying. You shrug. Only the usual way. He almost smiles. Almost. After he leaves, you sit by the fire and let the stillness settle in. It's rare, and you've learned to hold it like a fragile egg. Your apprentice sits beside you. Do you ever feel like it's too much? He asks. You tilt your head. The blood. The screaming. The jars full of pickled thumbs. No, he says. The weight of it. People bringing their worst to you, hoping you can fix it. You stare into the flames. All the time, you whisper. But you get used to it. Or you don't. And either way, the sun rises again. He nods, quiet. Then, after a long pause, he asks, do you think they'll remember us? You smile. Only when the lice return. He laughs, and you let it sit there, a moment between days. Outside, the wind picks up. A soft, steady rhythm against the shutters. Mildred the hen makes a muffled sound, settling in for the night. You light one more candle, check the tools, stir the leeches. All still. All waiting. And you, the barber, half healer, half therapist, all guesswork, ready to meet tomorrow with the same worn hands and sharp steel. Because someone has to. The room grows quiet now. The fire has burned low, casting soft orange shadows that flicker against the wall. The tools are clean. The herbs are hung to dry. Even the leeches have gone still in their jar, dark loops curled like sleeping commas. You sit, spine resting against the wall, legs stretched toward the hearth. Your apprentice has drifted off, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, but you don't wake him. Not yet. The village outside is hushed. No more visitors. No knock at the door. Just the soft creak of timber, the sigh of wind against the shutters, and the faint rustle of a hen repositioning herself on her stool. The day's stories are tucked away now, stitched hands, weeping eyes, cursed spleens, all faded into the quiet warmth of sleep. They came, they fretted, they healed, or they didn't. And you were there for all of it. You close your eyes. You breathe in time, soot, and the faint tang of vinegar. Familiar. Grounding. The scent of someone who tries, even when trying feels like pouring water into a sieve. You listen to the night breathe. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, someone is resting a little easier because of you. That's enough. So let your thoughts grow soft. Let the day unravel, thread by thread. You've earned your rest, Barber. Sleep well.